years, people like me have been telling people like you, leaders, managers, communicate, communicate, communicate. You gotta over communicate. You gotta communicate as much as you possibly can, right? Well, that's really good advice, and I happen to agree with it, but how do you take that from theory into reality? How do you actually sit down and have a one-on-one with an employee, particularly a remote employee, particularly somebody who's a remote employee in the middle of a major crisis like we're having now? So I gave that some thought and came up with the Pandemic Remote Employee Communicator. And I designed it to be a tool where there's preset questions that will allow you to focus on additional questions you wish to ask. Queuing questions so you can ask the employee questions that they're interested in hearing about. And as you continue through this process, it will allow you to be a more effective communicator with your employee. It takes that theory into action. In completing the Pandemic Crisis Remote Employee Communicator, like you would with any one-on-one meeting with an employee, I think the first thing you got to do is prepare for the call. In times of crisis, I would review the unknown to known transfer tool that we've discussed before. And that may help you understand what your folks are most scared of. Make sure you make a list of company updates. When an employee is remote, they're hearing gossip, they're not hearing fact. They're not reading every corporate email that comes out or missive, so you got to make sure they know what's going on. I think it's really important to review your emotional intelligence tools. You're going to react and talk differently to people depending on where they are and what position they're in, what boat they're in. So step 2, question and listen. Now, the first thing you want to do in a crisis, let them know what's going on with the company and their status as an employee. Don't save that for the end, because that's the thing they're most concerned about in a crisis. Is my job safe? Are we going to go bankrupt? Are we going to be okay? And if you say that to the end, they're not going to listen to anything else you're talking about, because that's the most important thing they're worried about. So lead with that. Some of the questions, and I said this earlier, are anti-HR. Because they're remote and they're in a crisis, it is absolutely appropriate to ask, how are you doing? How's your family doing? And if it's been a while, what's your daily routine now? What is it you do every day? How do you do it? Why do you do it that way? Just curious, no judgment at all. What's most frustrating to you right now? Make sure you listen to that, because that can be an action item for you. And then you turn that around by saying, what's been the most pleasant surprise since you started working from home? What are you most afraid of right now? And you turn that right around and say, what are you most grateful for right now? And then, of course, there's some places to add questions. When you're done with that, finish with, always, what questions do you have for me? Hopefully, they have prepared their questions before this started, so it isn't kind of random, but it's more focused. And then the second phase is commitments, which is a fancy way of saying expectations. How you will set expectations for them and vice versa. So you're committing these things. They can expect these things from you. And I put in 4 items here, and there's 4 places for you to write in your own individual areas. But you're also going to want to make sure that they have extremely specific expectations. It's even harder to manage people remotely than on site. I've often said, and I've done this both ways, I'd rather manage 400 people under one roof than 50 people under 3 roofs, or 4 or 5 or 50. So it's extremely important to lay out your expectations for them. Hold them accountable. Move from there. And the third page is kind of a riff on the unknown to known transfer. The only thing I've added were a couple of things. Remind them by asking them this question. Who are 3 people I can rely on to help? And that might be my friends, my coworker, something like that. But then they also need to recognize that there are 3 people who need to rely on them. They're always, at least. And it might be my kids. It might be my neighbor or parent or something like that. And then I think this is always an opportunity to practice gratitude. There's always a good time. Reset their minds on what's important. What are they grateful for? And then finally, kind of a mini positive focus. In the past 90 days, what's one thing you're extremely proud of? And that becomes how to complete the unknown to known transfer.